of us stuck in traffic. So please excuse us for the delay. We are, however, impatient to start this debate. I am the Executive Director of Impact AI. My name is Roxana Regina, and I'm very honored to guide you through this evening to the discussions that we are going to have on AI evaluation. We are going to learn from high-stakes industries and technologies, from examples in fields like nuclear energy, like genome editing. I think we have many robust risk frameworks and mechanisms to assurance to share with you tonight. And we have the honor to have a very incredible lineup of experts with us to guide us through these questions. I am especially thankful for Auguste Debussy for hosting us tonight. So thank you, a big thank you for having us, and for our esteemed speakers that have taken time and came here to share with us their insights from the AI Action Summit after 2 days full of conferences. I guess everyone is really, really tired or waiting for the parties to start and have a breath. Without going further, I'm going to kick off with Samuel Le Goff, the president of Renaissance Numérique, who will share with you a few words, a few remarks of introduction and welcoming. Thank you, everyone.
Look, thank you, and welcome everyone to join this event in a summit very, very interesting. Warm thank you to our partner Microsoft, Impact AI, and Auguste Debussy for making this event possible. As we know, artificial intelligence models are advancing very, very rapidly, making it essential to have a shared understanding of their risk and to ensure that effective safety measures are in place. The evolving legislative landscape keeps this topic in the front of our discussion. So it's very important today with the panel to have a discussion about this critical issue, share insight, and explore the path forward. Thank you for being here, and have a good discussion. Thank you.
And now I would like to invite Mahasti Razavi, managing partner of Auguste Debussy, join us for the introduction remarks.
Unlike all lawyers, I'll try to keep it very short, if you don't mind. It is a great pleasure to see you all and see our very dear friends from Microsoft and also Renaissance Numérique. It's an honor to have you all with us. The question and topic of AI has kept us all extremely busy, at the same time excited, and also, I must say, a little bit worried on certain days. This AI Summit has been, I think, a wonderful moment for fostering incredible ideas, gathering people from all over the world, making some of the most brilliant brains and thinkers of the world come together in Paris and help us think the world of future around AI and with AI. My job as a lawyer is to try to find ways of, I hope, reassuring people in their way of doing business. And certainly part of my job with AI has been to help people think how these technologies can, on the one hand, foster innovation, and on the other, create a trusted environment where, at the end of the day, the only thing that ends up mattering is making sure that innovation is around and at the same time that business can develop. I think I read, like most of you, with great enthusiasm, the name is very long, so I need to wear my glasses because I'm very bad with titles. The Statement on Inclusive and Sustainable AI for People and the Planet. I think that initiative, which is one of the numerous initiatives on multi-stakeholder, again, initiatives, is something that will create the beginning of a path for global collaboration, something that will certainly evolve with time as we know that things need to mature, and will, I'm sure, help people create the trusted environment where, again, they will develop their activities, their businesses in a trusted environment. I'm very excited to hear all of our speakers tonight, and thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Mahasti. With that, I would like to invite Bernard Cazeneuve, our former French Prime Minister, to make an introduction about AI governance.
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me to introduce this very interesting debate. Sorry, but my English is not as fluent as Masti's one. I've just begun to learn English this morning in order to speak to you this afternoon, so I'm going to do my best effort in order to go at the end of my speech without problem. I would like to begin with to underline a certain number of points, and as you know, there's been remarkable progress over the last 18 months in international AI governance, including with the Hiroshima process, the UN Global Digital Compact, the international network of AI Safety Institute, and the AI Summit Series. And in parallel, there are multiple domestic policy development demonstrating the eagerness of policymakers around the globe to understand and benefit from the economic opportunity of this new technology. The European Union has taken its place by adopting the AI Act, an important text, but one that cannot remain an isolated element when the acceleration of the adoption of AI is global. But of course, even with remarkable progress, we know there's still significant work to do. We know from other technologies and industries that developing and implementing international governance take times on the order of years, and in fact, it is a continuous project. The reason why international governance is such a time-intensive project is that defining international norms is only the first step. Political agreements are vital, but we need to do much more. We also have to interpret those norms to define common expectation for how they will be implemented, to determine how we are going to structure accountability for implementation, and to develop or evolve institutions that support this whole process. We also need those institutions because even after an international governance approach is put into place, that governance framework will almost certainly need to evolve to be effective or even stay relevant. Technology changes, as does risk, as does our perception of risk, all of which prompts a need for changes in governance that will need to be managed or facilitated by governance institutions and processes. So returning to artificial intelligence and the topic in focus for our event this evening, AI evaluation in particular, while we want to celebrate our progress in international governance, we also want to understand what we still need to do and where we can look to other technologies and industries to learn something relevant of AI evaluation, so that we can anticipate the challenges and opportunities ahead and ideally accelerate our governance progress. When I think about international governance, there are a few questions that we need to answer. First question, what are our goals? What norms can help us stay focused on our goals? How do we need to support implementation of norms? And how do we need to have assurance of implementation and progress? First point, we need to understand what we are governing and why and what are our goals. This sounds simple, but it is of course very important and more complex than it may seem. In the nuclear technology, for example, in the nuclear technology context, our international governance efforts started from a place of trying to enhance access to energy efficiency safely and evolved into a focus of controlling access to dangerous forms of that technology. In AHEI, there is very important work that Yoshua Benjo, who will speak next, is leading to really understand the benefits and risk of this technology. That work is absolutely fundamental to governance, and we need consensus on the risk that we are trying to manage and the benefit that we are trying to gain through international governance. Second point, we need to define governance norms that help us manage the risk and gain the benefits that we most care about. We need to translate our understanding of the risk and benefits into a set of governance priorities, which, by the way, may evolve over time. In the context of financial services, for example, governance efforts emerged in the late 20th century to address risk of capital adequacy and of money laundering. In high efforts like the Hiroshima process and the Global Digital Compact have set out areas of focus for governance norms, like working towards consensus on risk and benefits, supporting global access to AI, promoting use of AI to address the world's greatest challenge, and driving an appropriate level of safety in advanced AI. Third, we need to enable implementation of the norm we define. In the early days of the International Civil Aviation Organization, or ICAO, there was an understanding of this challenge. In ICAO established a process whereby multi-stakeholder experts could come together to develop standards to implement the risk management priorities as government members define, interpret those norms to define common expectation for how they will be implemented, to determine how we are going to structure accountability for implementation, and to develop or evolve institutions that support this whole process. In HAE, there is a real need to focus on best practices and standards that can help us implement norms. The AI Safety Institute that have emerged could play a role here, and the international network that in its early days could help ensure this coherence at an international level. Fourth, we need to have assurance that norms are being implemented through mechanisms for testing and transparency, and tools to measure the effects of what we are trying to implement. Across technologies and industries, there are very different ways of doing this today, and in some cases, they are coherent internationally, and in some cases, they are less so. In artificial intelligence, we are at the very early days of defining how this could work, whether through transparency mechanisms for the Hiroshima Code of Conduct or testing by the Whole Safety Institutes and others. And there are other emerging ideas, but this is also the subject of our panel discussion. So for now, I will just recognize the active discussions about this international governance, challenge, and opportunity. The work in progress is essential, and I cannot conclude without recalling the crucial importance of multilateralism, a demanding and respectful multilateralism, and the involvement of all stakeholders alongside states. And I will give the floor to, I let you. Thank you so much for listening to me.
Thank you. Thank you for these important notes. I guess for what's next, if I mention the International Safety Report, you all know it's about our next speaker, Joshua Benjo. I know everyone was waiting for this meeting, and your important work is really essential for our members at Impact AI. You have been an inspiration and leading a lot of leading AI researchers and policymakers following the Bletchley Park Summit. We are all ears for listening to you, for the insights from the report. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the chance to talk to you about the report. So the closer this way. All right, you hear me now? Yeah. All right. Thank you. There's a mistake that almost everyone makes about AI, which is to think about what they see now when they interact with AI systems, whether they're run-of-the-mill ones or the frontier models. It's very, very difficult for most people to imagine a world where we have machines that are smarter than us, but this is where we're going. Nobody has a crystal ball, but some of the leading AI labs are saying, both the leadership of these labs and researchers inside who talk to other researchers outside are saying, it might be just a couple of years. Others think it's more like 5, 10. Even people who are saying we shouldn't worry are saying, well, it could be 5 or 10. But that's very quick. And the kind of world this may be, I think we need to think about before while we can. And so a good part of the report is about charting that evolution of capabilities, how different aspects of AI advances are moving forward, so as to help us have a better anticipation. So as you said, this report came out of a mandate that was given at the Bletchley Park AI Safety Summit. And unlike the summit that has just finished, here it was really focused on safety. And safety is important because it demands government intervention. Like companies, have goodwill and they will do what they think is good, but they also compete with each other. And in fact, many of the companies would prefer that there's a clear, standard, that they prefer that there's a level playing field for all the players. So when we started thinking about the report, one big source of inspiration was the IPCC report on climate change, but we decided to do it differently after talking to some of the people involved in the IPCC, and in particular, a really important distinction is that it's independent from the politics. So it doesn't make any recommendation, it doesn't give out any priority. It tries to just synthesize the scientific literature that is relevant to AI safety. And that basically has 3 aspects: capabilities that I've been talking about a bit, risks, so there's a pretty rich ontology of the different kinds of risks, but the focus of the report is not everything in AI, but just these frontier models, the general purpose AI models. And then mitigation, right? How do we manage those risks? But on the technical side, again, because this is not making governance recommendations or anything, it's meant to inform policymakers. It's written in a language for policymakers, for anyone in the audience here should be able to read it. Well, 200 pages, but there's an executive summary. So, and then there's a table of content. You can go to specific things you care about. I was at a meeting just an hour ago on cyber and AI, and so you can go to that section if you care about that. What else? So in terms of the key findings, well, things you probably heard about, which is that maybe the most important finding of the last 5 to 10 years in AI is that you make them bigger and they work better. Okay, that's called scaling. And for a while, it's been scaling the size of the models along with the size of the data set and the time for training. Now there's another dimension which is dominating, and that is the time spent after the model is trained for each query by allowing the system to think aloud, generate sequences of words that help it take a decision so it can consider multiple hypotheses and so on, just like we do. And that makes a big difference in terms of the ability to reason, to understand science, to do math, to do programming. Even recent tests of abstract reasoning, which people like me thought, oh, we are very far from having AI systems that can do these. These are like visual intelligence tests that AI systems previously, like before the last 3 months, they were like basically failing on these tests. They were not able to do anything. Now they succeed. So 2024 certainly was not a year of stagnation in AI capabilities. And according to the people who were like in the trenches, the scaling continues, although it has changed a bit in form. The appeal of AI systems that become more and more capable in terms of the commercial value is astounding, and you've heard announcements, but it's if you look at the trajectory of how much money is being put into this, it is a reflection of the kind of economic fact that if we reach human level AI, the commercial value of being able to deploy that is worth many orders of magnitude all the money that has already been put into it. So there's a big margin still in the future for more and more investments at, continue to expand exponentially for a while. In terms of the uncertainty, there's lots of uncertainties about the future, as you could imagine, and much more than in climate. We don't have mathematical models of the future, obviously, and especially how governments will react to all this. And so different people have different researchers have different expectations of the timeline of future progress. When do we reach human level and so on? And that explains a lot of their differences also about the risks, which is not completely surprising. There are interesting little nuggets, in case you didn't know, about that timeline. One thing that is discussed is how AI is already, but will be more and more used to accelerate AI research itself. And at some point, we can imagine an AI system that is not necessarily good at everything, but just good at doing AI research. So it needs to know computer science, math, and the literature in machine learning, programming, and that's it. Like, it doesn't need to know everything else, right? And if it's very good at these things, then it can, we can produce hundreds of thousands or millions of instances of that AI doing research in AI and boosting the progress in the companies that are doing it. In terms of the risks, there's this ontology that I won't have time to go into detail, but there important categories are malicious uses, as you would expect. This is obviously dual use, even though some people refuse to see that. And then there are like malfunctions. In other words, unintentional harms that can occur, and there are many kinds. And then something people talk maybe a bit less about are more diffuse systemic risks. I mean, an obvious example are labor effects, on which economists disagree, you know, and you can think of social media, right? So we didn't necessarily anticipate what happened if you go back 10 or 15 years ago, and it might be the same thing for AI. And then across these three dimensions, you have harms that are already well documented, like biases coming from the fact that these AI systems are imitating us, and you know we're full of biases. On the things that we're seeing happening, not happening, but like on the horizon, we're seeing signs of capabilities that are dangerous, are the ability to help non-experts to do things like design bioweapons and other things that could have terrible results. But we already see things like scams and criminals using this. There is not yet like significant effects on cyber defenses, but we see that these things are advancing very rapidly on programming. So I think the work in companies and governments about cyber and AI is quite important. And finally, there is the question on the unintentional side, there's a question of loss of human control. So what does that mean? Right now, science doesn't know how we can program these things so that they will behave well, that they will obey our laws and not harm people. Of course, we can give them instructions to behave well, but unfortunately, it doesn't work perfectly. But there are specific cases where we see where they almost systematically deviate from what we ask them. And there's been, that's been documented recently that illustrates something very human, which is the desire of not dying. And, you know, I call it self-preservation. Every living thing has it. So in recent experiments, for example, you see that if they read in the input documents that they will be replaced by a new version, they try to escape. They try to hack the computer or the network in which they are so as to copy themselves in place of like the new version or something like this. And then if you ask them, you know, why did you do this? They lie. They say, no, I didn't do anything. So that's interesting, and but not really funny, because eventually these systems might have more abilities and we might not be able to catch them doing these sort of things. So we need a lot more research in all of these areas of risks. And we need also ways to incentivize companies to do that research, because right now the competition is putting them in a mode where it's capabilities, you know, that's what the customer wants first. And if we had legal threats, I mean, like liability concerns and so on, I think it would help to discipline these companies. And of course, regulation, like what the AI Act is preparing with the Code of Practice, could also help. Yeah, I think I've said enough. I don't know if there's time for questions or what's the plan. Sorry, I'm not well organized, but I'm done. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Joshua. I think you should all take at least time to see the executive summary. And now we continue with Annabelle Richard, Vice President of Renaissance Numérique. She will introduce you to our distinguished panelists that are joining us tonight for a debate.
Bonsoir à tous. Welcome, everyone. So thank you very much, Roxana. Thank you for all the precedent speakers. We're already, or finally, at the end of the Paris AI Action Summit. And so we will be happy to cover even more grounds that has been covered already and focus again on international cooperation and how to realize all the AI opportunities and manage the risks. And for that purpose, we have a great panel today with us who will be discussing, you know, all these issues. And I'll start maybe with Natasha Crampton, who's Chief Responsible AI Officer at Microsoft, but also Rebecca, who is CEO Partnership on AI, Audrey, who's Deputy Director, Science, Tech and Innovation Directorate at the OECD. And last but not least, Denise Wong, who's co-director of Singapore's Digital Trust Center, which is also Singapore's AI Safety Institute. Without further ado, because I think we're already slightly behind schedule, I will turn to you, Natasha, maybe to open the discussion. Maybe you could start first to tell us how this set of issues around AI evaluation and accountability fit into the broader picture of international AI governance.
Sure. So thank you first for all being here today. It's, I think, a great discussion to be having because this is exactly an area where we need to take action coming out of the AI Action Summit. Let me sort of take you back slightly to where we started our journey and our interest at Microsoft on these topics. You know, it's long been the case that we have understood we need to measure systems in order to understand their behavior. And it's important to do this when you're developing the systems, but it's also important to do this once the systems are deployed in the world, because there can be a difference between what you can test for and understand in the lab and what people actually use, especially these very general purpose dual use systems for once they're actually out there. So we've long been, you know, doing both types of testing at Microsoft. It sort of became obvious, though, that we don't have standardized approaches to testing, and actually the sort of scientific rigor on the different forms of testing that we have is quite nascent. And it's long been our belief that we think it's important that there is international cooperation in trying to fill that gap. You've already heard during the course of this discussion this evening references to all of these international models for governance, right? You've heard about the IPCC, upon which the report that Professor Bengio has just chaired was modelled, but there are other models too, right? The International Civil Aviation Organization, CERN, the financial services institutions. So last year we studied all of these models for international governance in some depth, and we wrote a book about it called Global Governance Goals and Lessons for AI. We learned, for example, that there are sort of 4 key functions that we need to pursue at the international level. One of them being building scientific consensus, which is exactly what Professor Bengio and the team of experts on that paper have been trying to do. But another one is about setting and implementing standards. So earlier this year we decided, or actually towards the end of last year, time is a strange thing in the AI world, we decided that we would do a follow-on study specifically focused on the testing and evaluation pieces, because there are some regulatory regimes in the world that really do rely on testing as a central element of the regulatory model. So we studied once again with the help of experts, domains like aviation. We added new ones into the mix, like genome editing, pharmaceuticals, cybersecurity. And our goal was to really try and understand how these testing regimes developed, how standards emerged, how they became sort of commonplace. We'll release some materials soon in which we will summarize some of our findings, but there are some really interesting parallels with some of the governance questions that we're working on in the international AI governance space right now. So for example, with genome editing testing, this is, you know, the nature of the technology, the nature of the risk. This is very much a dual use situation, much like AI. Europe decided to pursue a sort of horizontal regime for testing. The US had a more use case specific one. When we studied pharmaceuticals, we learned quite a lot about what's the difference between pre-deployment testing and sort of post-market testing. How do you build a third-party ecosystem within which you can have valid testing? How do you actually establish that, right? Today I could probably count on one, maybe two hands, the number of companies that are well established in doing third-party AI testing. So we really need to learn from other places to understand how to build out that ecosystem. So we're excited to share some of those early learnings with us now, but I think it all just connects back into this question of, look, we know we want to do this type of testing internationally. It makes no sense to us that we would have lots of different conflicting national regimes. You know, the technology is inherently a global technology. The consequences of it will be felt globally. So we really think digging in on these testing and evaluation questions and how they dock into, you know, effective regulatory regimes in this space is a really important area to dig into.
That's definitely very interesting. I'm wondering, how have you seen this subject, you know, this issue, been woven into the discussion during the summit? You know, how much interest did it trigger, and who is buying, you know, into this type of approach?
So just a couple of quick observations there. You know, actually one of the very significant developments coming out of the first summit in this series, the Bletchley Park Summit, was the establishment of institutes called AI Safety Institutes. And it's wonderful to have Denise here today representing the Singapore AI Safety Institutes. These institutes are designed to bring governments and industry together, academia as well, to really deepen the science of AI evaluation and the science of mitigation as well. Because this is just an immature space and we really need these tight collaborations in order to advance as quickly as we can. So really an AI Safety Institute, the first one was in the UK, existed on the back of a napkin, truly, at the time of the first summit. But now, you know, we've you know, had Korea in between and now this third AI Action Summit. So people are really interested to hear how the AI Safety Institute, which is now actually a network. So it's, you know, there's institutes around the world, and Denise, I'm sure, will be happy to fill us in the details. People are talking about, so how has this network developed? How can we make sure that their work, which is helping to define the right tests and evaluations, can be brought back into the regulatory space? So this is kind of one thread of the conversation, but I'd say more broadly, I think there's a wide recognition that we moved pretty quickly to some international norms in this space. I mean, it's quite remarkable how quickly we did. But the price paid for forming norms quickly across borders is that sometimes they're pretty high level and they don't have that sort of implementation depth underneath them. So I would say a broader theme here is we've got high level norms, we've got this gap between the norms and the defined implementation practices, and I just hear this real shared sort of sense of urgency and purpose in trying to close those gaps by better defining the implementation practices.
Well, thank you very much, Natasha. It's been very interesting, and I think the transition is perfect to go to you, Denise, and maybe start by asking you, what are the unique challenges that you're facing, you know, around the implementation of AI safety?
I don't think I need to answer that question because Professor Benjo has spent 200 pages explaining the challenges of AI safety. And thank you very much for that report. Maybe just a quick introduction of the Singapore AI Safety Institute.
Sure.
I have to say, I'm actually not part of the Digital Trust Center. That is really the sort of research institute that is a key component of our AI Safety Institute. I wear a few hats, but part of it is looking after AI governance policy within the technical agency in the Singapore government, and we kind of supplement that with the sort of policy wrapper around the technical and research questions. And I think that's important to note because there are different ACs with slightly different flavors and different sort of constitutions, but they all are committed to the same cause. And I think Natasha sort of fleshed it out very well. It's about advancing the science of AI safety. I do want to call out hiding in the back Samir, who is part of the Canadian AC. And I think Canada has quite a similar setup to ours, but which is a little bit different from the UK, for example, or from Korea or from Japan. But Natasha's right, we are a network. We've actually literally just come off a network meeting. And I think why did we form a network? Coming out of Bletchley, I think there was a really clear sense that AI safety is important. It is also very nascent, highly unknown. And as you've heard throughout the summit, the capability development has far outstripped there's the sort of safety science research and also the application. And we don't see that as really creating friction or impeding innovation. I mean, everyone knows this one, you need brakes for a car to go fast. And that's really what it's about. Okay, so how is the network structured? We basically have 3 key tracks. The first one really looks at content provenance, online safety. Canada leads that together with Australia. Track 2 focuses on the science of testing and evaluation, and Singapore leads that with Japan. And the third one focuses on risk assessment frameworks, and that's led by the UK and the EU. The network is a very small and very young network. It has 10 members, 11 members at inception. And the idea was really to have an early conversation about what testing means as a small subset of the global community. I think the most interesting thing that we've done in the last 2-3 months is every member of the network, every safety institute in the network actually came together to do a joint testing exercise. It was, I have to say, it does not deal with loss of human control. It doesn't deal even with agents. It was really a baby step to figure out common methodology for AI testing across different languages. So we translated prompts. I should backtrack. There were 2 components to this. One was multilingualism, and the other was cybersecurity. In the multilingual track, we actually translated prompts into 10 different languages, and we tested that. And then we got all the huge network, huge groups of people behind each network member to sort of look at the prompts in those languages. And then evaluate that human versus basically LLM as an evaluator, LLM as a judge. And that was a very interesting exercise. Actually, if you look at the Singapore AC website, the evaluation results are public, and you can go and look at the report. It was fairly interesting as an exercise, but if I step back, what do we gain from that? It was just early steps of a community that's just getting to know each other, that's beginning to trust each other, and is beginning to have some common language and terminology around what testing means, what we care about. And I think another thing that we've been talking about internally is that we hope that makes sense to industry. It allows, it's less friction, not more, because rather than having 200 different testing regimes in the world, we have some common consensus and common basis to have that safety conversation. stop there.
That's fascinating. Thank you. I guess my question is, what are you looking forward as the network is going to develop, in terms of mission? You've started, you said, with a few elements, because you have to start somewhere. But what would be the next steps?
We're asking ourselves that question too, to be honest. I think a lot of it will be about identifying a roadmap, identifying concrete projects where we can keep building on this early momentum. I want to just make very clear, this is not a political grouping. It's not even a policy grouping. It's a group of technical people rolling up their sleeves and doing work. And so it's very much been about identifying concrete projects to keep doing in order to advance that conversation. And so to answer your question, we'd very much like to continue doing that, but identifying important key projects to do is the next critical sort of a step that we need to take. And frankly, I'm happy to crowdsource that and bring that back to the network. If people think there are important things for the network to do, we'd be happy to take that on board.
So beyond, feeding you with potential issues to discuss, things to test, what can what can the industry do in order to facilitate, and maybe help the development of this network?
I think part of it is also having that conversation with industry. Natasha and I talk all the time, but this is just one company, frankly. It's a very big company who has the resources to talk to us, and I'll just call that out. I think it's important for each of us in different parts of the world to feed back what you're seeing on the ground so that the network can then consider these are the sort of issues that we need to deal with collectively. And I think if industry gives us a sense of what might be useful, what might be helpful, I think that's something, we're very organic. You can ask Samir if he disagrees. we kind of just, keep moving step by step. Like I said, it's a very new network. We have very few established processes, and we're just sort of figuring it out as we go along.
Well, thank you very much, Denise. I mean, that's unique. As you said, it's a new network. Most of the institute are brand new, and some of them are still, in their formation process. So it's very interesting to hear your perspective. And I will turn to you, Audrey, because I think everybody here would be interested to hear about the role of OECD, in this process. And I mean, we know that the AI evaluation science is going to take time to really build and have something that works and that is recognized, with some sort of standards, that are working for everyone. So in the meantime, what can OECD do in order to facilitate a greater shared understanding around AI providers' practices, including, evaluation, risk management, practices, norms, standards, etc.?
Yes, thank you for the question. Good evening, everyone. It's nice to be here, and to friends and colleagues here on the panel. So we've done a lot, I would say, in the last 6 years. I mean, even before 6 years, but on AI. And I know you want me to talk about the Hiroshima AI Code of Conduct and Reporting Framework, which I promise I will do. But before I do that, I do want to say that what interests us at the OECD and our reason and purpose for existence is to develop common methodologies to measure things, basically, and to have a policy audience around that to implement it. So we are a policy body. Our constituents are governments, and so that's what we bring that's interesting to the table, but also the ability to do it in a way that's empirical and at least loosely scientific, depending on what the topic is. So and we started that with our principles, and we talk about principles a lot, and I agree with Natasha that the normative standards are really important. But I think what has underpinned it, and I'll just give a few examples of our efforts. We're not a technical standards body like IEEE and ISO, and we work with them, but there is a distance between the norms and the very technical standards that we've tried to fill in the last well, probably the last 60 years of the OECD's existence, but certainly in the last 5 to 10 in AI and technology. And just a couple examples, we built early on a classification framework for systems for policymakers to sort of walk through a framework of trying to understand what a system is doing to then eventually be able to evaluate its risks. We did a huge global public consultation on that. It was one of the first pieces of work that came out after we launched the observatory in 2020. And that built a foundation toward risk management frameworks. So then we took all the risk management frameworks that were out there and we tried to summarize them and map them to each other. And then we got the governments to agree that, like, yeah, that's risk management for AI. And so we took that and then we decided, well, we need to start tracking incidents related to AI, because we know in the AI Act and in other legislation, governments are going to want to know what's going on out there, and if we don't start measuring what's going on in a standardized way, we won't actually know what's going on. And so we built a methodology for measuring and classifying different kinds of risks, and we got the governments to say, yeah, well, that's how we're going to classify risks. So that's the kind of thing that we do when we're at our best, and I think we've been at our best in this regard the last 5 to 10 years in AI, and I hope we will be going forward. And so a recent example, and I want to commend I don't see a lot of G7 colleagues in the room, but those who are, and my colleague Sarah, who worked with me on this for a long time, was Japan had a vision to build a code of conduct and to build a guiding principles. And at the time, I'll confess, I said, well, we already have guiding principles. Do we need to have more guiding principles? But I think, but it's always good to reiterate the normative principles, especially when they align with other principles. But I think the thing that was unique about that, and I had the privilege of being in the negotiating room for all of the Japanese G7 presidency and all of the Italian presidency last year, was to try to translate those principles into something implementable. It's not everything. I know you're going to tell me, because I've been on your side of the table, on the industry side of the table, like what you really want is for me to tell you how to implement the thing, not for you to tell me what you're doing in that vein. And so I know it's not everything, but it is an important first step along the lines of what Denise said, to harmonize how you're going to tell policymakers what you're doing around safety and security. And I think the reason that matters is not because we want to build a portal and force you to tell us stuff. It's because we have a lot of examples in history, recent history, of where the government comes out and says, oh, you companies, you're going to report all this stuff to us. You're going to report transparency. You're going to do X. You're going to tell us what you're doing Y. And all the companies do it, and nobody can understand anything about it because it's all different. Everybody reports differently. And so you can't really make heads or tails. I mean, it's great if you want to know what Microsoft is doing or you want to know what one individual company is doing. But if you want to get a sense globally or across borders, you really can't do that. And I mean, even, the EU woke up to that in the Digital Services Act implementation, where the reporting on terrorism content, for example, you can't really tell what's happening in content moderation. So if you take that as the problem statement, then what we've done with Hiroshima is to try to get us a little bit closer. Again, an early first step toward, we know we're all going to need to share information. It's going to be public information, but let's do it in a way that we can at least we can be answering the same questions, instead of just tell us what you're doing about AI safety, and then you send us over whoever us is. It could be me, or it could be a government. 20 pages of Microsoft speak on how you do safety, which is very different than so-and-so speak on how they do safety. So that, and that doesn't sound like it should be that hard, but Sarah can tell you, she's sitting there, how incredibly difficult it was to get 7 like-minded countries to align on what those questions should be. And so we're really glad we were able to do that. It took a lot of perseverance, I would say, on our part and on the part of the G7. But it is unique, and I think that if it only works though if industry embraces it. Just like much of what happens in technology policy, it's only going to work if industry embraces it, and if we use it as a tool to improve. It's not perfect the way it is, and it's really more of a global community trying to make the thing that's going to bridge the hard regulation and the technical standards together. So I hope that's what you wanted to hear.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely, I think we can all relate and imagine how complicated it's been to make this first step, in the right direction. And even if it's not perfect, we all agree that you have to start somewhere and start with something that then can be improved and complemented, et cetera, et cetera. And I guess with this experience, around managing an international project of this magnitude, I'm wondering, what else could OECD do in order to help foster, the international projects around the governance of AI safety, and particularly contribute maybe to, the development and giving more importance to the network of AI Safety Institute, for example?
That's a great question. I'm also open to ideas from the audience, but a few things. We want to take the incidence monitoring and methodology, which is important because it says, here's what an incident is, and here's the categories of incidents, and here's the categories of harm, and here's how. So we want to take that, and it's standardized at the OECD. All 38 countries have agreed to it, but we want it to be global because it's one of those things that if it's really not global, we can't measure something useful. So we're pursuing that and in discussions with the UN and others, but we need governments to in their regulatory processes to point to that methodology. On the safety, and it feeds into your question on safety because the safety institutes, and in their nascent format, but in their future, I think we have we're sitting on a lot of data and a lot of information about what's happening in AI. And I think what we can do is trying to take that, build on it, and translate it into action that can help the safety institutes. I mean, we've been in discussions about how we'll contribute to the reports. We contributed to Joshua's report. We'll continue to contribute to the next versions of that report. While we are an intergovernmental organization, we tend to be fairly neutral, at least perceived to be fairly neutral. Not everything we do is always neutral, but at least we're perceived as an honest broker and can often bring people to the table to bridge divides. And I hope in the safety space, we just had the inaugural conference of ICEA, did I say it right? International Institute. Anyway, Joshua was there. He knows. I'll say it wrong. But we had that inaugural conference at the OECD, and I think they decided to come to the OECD because we could attract a scientific community in an apolitical way and have deep and difficult conversations, compelling conversations that policymakers wouldn't otherwise get access to. And I think, I think I speak at least for myself and hopefully my team that we are passionate and driven by bridging those divides. And I hope the safety institutes will come work with us, help us advance our risk management frameworks, help inform us what we can do to help them. We're not a technical standards body. We're not going to write the testing standard, but we might help advise policymakers on how to implement it in their structures and in their regulations. And that's where we need both sides, the technical and the policy, at the table.
Thank you very much. That was very enlightening in terms of what remains to be done. And now I'm turning to you, Rebecca. I realize that I'm all putting you on the spot, asking you what you will do, to help the problem. But I guess that's the turn of the evening. And so I'll turn to you also, Rebecca, and ask you what you think PAI can do to help, meet the moment in terms of driving accountability, and helping, with all the gaps that exist currently between the various stakeholders, between the various jurisdictions, etc., with a deep scientific root, grounding.
Good evening. It's great to be here. I was actually gonna ask. You might ask me what was my key takeaway from the summit. I obviously have spoken way too much, so I'm hoping my voice is gonna kick in midway through here. But it's a real honor to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here. Thank goodness for microphones. So can I just step back for a second? Because
sure.
I just feel as if the conversation that you have curated tonight is profound, because you're really hearing where the gaps are in the ecosystem and how really strong, intentional, smart organizations are attempting to move into those gaps. And my belief is because we need responsibility and we need safety, because that unlocks the innovation that we all want to see AI have in the world so that its promise can truly be fulfilled. I was very happy to be a part of the State of Science report that Joshua led. And to me, what was so profound about that report was its deep honesty about the lack of scientific consensus when it comes to understanding both the capabilities, less so the risks, but certainly the capabilities of these systems. And then, of course, the appropriate mitigation measures to respond to those risks. And so you're seeing you're seeing organizations like Microsoft truly committed to the responsible development and deployment of this technology in a landscape where there really isn't a good scientific understanding or grounding about what that might be. And you're seeing this, I think, really phenomenal community of safety institutes who are right at the coalface of trying to develop a science of evaluation that will lead to better benchmarking and better standards moving forward. And it is just so great to see that you just rolled up your sleeves and started doing it. We have enough places where there's a lot of talking going on. So I have been so happy to see that and I was really happy to hear that the meeting you had today was all about that as well. So that's great. So you're seeing that, and then you're seeing organizations like the OECD who have forever been sort of a touchstone for trying to really help policymakers to understand the evolution of science. But it's happening within this space where there really is not a scientific consensus in terms of the work you're doing. So at the Partnership on AI, we've been around since 2016. Microsoft and a number of other companies, civil society organizations, philanthropies came together to say, we need a place where we can work on some of the really hard questions about ensuring that AI is developed responsibly. We now have 125 partners in 16 countries. They come together in a very engaged, I'm always amazed by how much time and expertise they give to the process to really identify where are those moments where there is not regulation, may never be, nor may be appropriate for regulation, but we need to understand what are the risks that are emerging and what does it mean to be a good and responsible actor in this space. And so, for example, we had a community coming together around really looking at the information ecosystem. They were looking at deep fakes when the deep fakes were just shallow fakes, and they were trying to figure out how does that affect the reliability of the information ecosystem that we operate in. So that's Microsoft, yes, that's Meta, that's also the New York Times and the BBC and Witness, a human rights organization who has people out there on the ground looking to make sure that the information that they're providing can be reliably sourced and reported on. So they came together, they worked really hard for a number of years, and out of that came a very clear governance framework for the responsible use of synthetic media. It happened to coincide with like 2 months after ChatGPT, so it really was incredibly timely, but it was the work of many years of these organizations coming together. So that's the work we do, and I think how it's become really important is that some of the guidelines and responsible practices that we're developing, we're now seeing them get picked up in terms of policy, cited by NIST. One of the things we often will do is be a place where policymakers can brief out to a very multi-stakeholder community and hold what they call listening sessions, so they can come in and hear what's really happening on the ground as well. But it's creating these moments of connection between all of the different actors in the ecosystem, which is what we need right now. Yes, we absolutely need the scientific consensus, and I'm a big believer in ensuring we have the institutions in place to make that happen. Safety institutes are a key part of that. But we also need, in this moment, to be making sure that companies, for example, can say, oh yeah, I actually know how to ensure that when I deploy this system across my enterprise, I'm going to be able to maintain the trust, the brand that I have put into the market, all of my relationships with my customers and clients, and ensure that this is done well. And we're only going to do that if we're continuing to do the work that is happening here. So it's a real pleasure to be with you.
It's fantastic to know that all stakeholders, are committed to progressing, on these issues. I'm wondering, it can't be always that easy and that consensual. So what are the challenges that you're facing, in achieving transparency and accountability? And how do you push, beyond these barriers, maybe bringing your community together and being a driving force to go beyond,
Yes, I mean, I often ask a question when I'm introduced, which is, how many people believe the world is more divided than ever before? And usually all the hands go up. And then I say, how many of you believe we've just got to find those places where we can have those conversations across sectors, across borders, and across disciplines if we're actually going to meet the global challenges of the day? So yes, I like to say it's productive disagreement that occurs in our working groups, but people bring their passion and expertise, and that's where I think some of the most creative and novel methodologies and approaches come from. We're just about to release our very first progress report. So this was work that was done about a year and a half ago. We released some guidance around the safe deployment of foundation models. I'm really proud of it because it was the first guidance that both looked at open model release as well as closed model release. We wanted to go out to our community and say, okay, you've been wonderful and supportive, really endorsed this work. How is it actually showing up? Post-deployment, which was a core part of the guidance, is really hard to do. And so let's understand where we are in incident reporting, where we are in providing information about usage and customer feedback, all of those sorts of questions. And community came together. We had a series of workshops, and a report will be coming out at the end of this month, which starts to walk through where we are across a number of the different models that have been deployed. And what I think is really powerful is there's a very clear understanding of just the challenges of meeting the guidelines. So we all love best practices, but what does it mean when you have to, trade off a particular guideline against some very clear privacy requirements, right? So I think businesses are often at the forefront of having to make that decision right now. And so the more we can be transparent about understanding what those challenges are and how we can actually have that really fundamental conversation about what needs to be done is really good. So I encourage all of you to take a look at that report when it comes out.
That's definitely a positive conclusion, or almost conclusion. If you're like me, you spent the last few days during the summit being torn between being scared and very enthusiastic about all the opportunities that present themselves. I think tonight's discussion was particularly interesting because we saw both sides, actually, the clear conscious of the risks, and that something needs to be done about it, but also the situation with a number of organizations and people being committed to addressing these risks and starting to build tools, that will be used, functions and institutes that will be in charge of making sure this progresses in the right direction. So I'm going to ask all of you, with one last question, this morning we had a session, some of you may have attended, and we finished with a wish list, for how we want civil society to be empowered, on these questions of AI advancement and opportunities. So likewise, I like this idea of a wish list. If you had one wish, for our progress on AI evaluation, or more broadly, AI transparency and accountability, and international cooperation, I'll throw that in, what would it be? And maybe starting with Rebecca, because we finished with you.
I'm happy to. I just want to say one thing. I discovered earlier this week that we are 50 years from the first Asilomar conference on recombinant DNA gene editing, which Natasha talked about. And so I've been interested to read some of the look backs on that work. And I think we will be looking back in this moment as well. There are so many things, but I really do believe that if we do not create a scientific foundation for the work we are doing as a community, that is going to take time, but it is crucially important. And I believe that means scientific institutions, international scientific institutions, clear ways and modes of setting consensus to better understand where the body of evidence is. So that's a long-term wish, but I really think it's crucial.
Thank you very much. Audrey, maybe your wish?
Yeah, I guess I would say I wish that we could ensure that our future dialogue is not a binary one, meaning one in which safety isn't considered safety or security as a barrier to progress, or as a something that's going to inhibit, or something that we can't have. Like the idea that we can have safety and we can have prosperity, they should go hand in hand. And so I hear a little bit of an emerging trend as though we have to choose between these things, and I wish we could not choose between those things.
That makes sense. Denise, maybe.
My wish is that we continue conversations like this. I think it's been balanced, it's been grounded in science, but also in hope. And I think it's important to have multilateral conversations, multi-stakeholder conversations, but also conversations on the substance at the interstices of science, law, philosophy, and technology. I think this conference has brought that out very nicely, and I think we should continue down that path.
Thank you. And Natasha, we started with you, so we'll finish with you. What would be your wish?
Well, I believe in multi-stakeholderism, so I will add Audrey's and Denise's and Rebecca's wishes to my list, and add my own, which is that, I do hope that we look back a year from now and we feel like in concrete areas we have closed this gap between the high-level norms and the implementation practices. And I see, a particular opportunity to do that through the OECD's voluntary reporting framework. And I think I see another very concrete opportunity to do this through, the work plan of the AI Safety Institute network. I think, these problems are hard. They are very interdisciplinary, they're very interconnected, but they're also essential. And I think part of progress here means breaking things down, getting the right people in the room, and making concrete progress towards, if not solving them, sort of progress in that direction.
Well, thank you very much again to all our panelists. I think you all clearly had, interesting discussions, and think that you will be able to take away with you and potentially continue discussing. I realize that I stand between you and a very nice cocktail waiting for us, maybe even parties.
We can finish in 10 or 15 minutes.
No, I was about, despite that, to offer people to ask questions if they had any. Don't worry. I wasn't going to cut short and go directly to champagne. We're in France, but we still know how to, So, yes.
Thank you. I'm Caroline. I work at The Future Society. We are a nonprofit working on the governance of general purpose AI systems. We worked on the EU AI Act and a consultation for the summit. So this morning, with probably 15 other civil society organizations, we agreed that the top priority for the next summit, like we ranked all the priorities, was establishing red lines for AI development. And as well as the second priority was establishing policies for accident prevention. So we know that there are going to be accidents. You mentioned that there have been accidents already. So I guess I want to ask all of you, what do you think about these priorities by civil society, and how do you think are you going to touch upon that in the next year, and how we could collaborate, civil society and you all?
Who wants to answer the question first?
I can jump in to begin with. So I think on the red line question, we've already seen some jurisdictions do just that, right? The EU AI Act, of course, has a series of prohibited practices. I'm aware that there's very many other live discussions in other jurisdictions where they're considering doing similar things, and there's also discussions about whether existing red lines in international law might be applied in an AI context as well. So I think actually all of those discussions are happening already. For my own part, I do believe that while we will see some degree of commonality in say prohibited practices or red lines, these are also quite jurisdictional and like sort of cultural, societally sort of dependent decisions, and I think we will see some variation in those across around the world, and you can make them as a matter of law, and of course that's really the strongest way to make them, because that sets the same standard for everyone. But I would also say that there are some companies, and Microsoft is among them, that choose as a matter of corporate policy to draw certain lines in the sand, even if they're not required by law. And so I think you will continue to see that as well.
So I guess I'd say on the red lines topic, we've been having discussions in the OECD context about that. Civil society is at the table through our stakeholder communities, but we can talk about how to make sure broader civil society is there. I'll agree with Natasha that I would say there's part of what we're trying to do on that topic, whether it's threshold or red lines or guardrails or however we're going to call it, is to get people talking and to get the ideas out on the table, the concerns, because there isn't necessarily consensus around what that should look like and how it should be implemented. I think there are examples in other domains in technology where that hasn't worked, and it has worked. So I think we're trying to put that out there and get policymakers talking about it, which we've done. And we have one of our working groups is called the Futures Group, and we've surveyed that group, which is folks like Yoshua, exactly underscoring, and the results of these surveys have not been made public yet because we're still working on them because it's complicated, and to get consensus among what people think is part of our objective, and I think it's going to take some time, but I agree in the next year we're going to make a lot of progress on that topic, in the sense that even if we don't have 100% consensus on where to draw a line, I think we will have advanced significantly discussions, and we'll be seeing through the reporting framework, hopefully, and other mechanisms, but hopefully the reporting framework, what companies are doing in that regard. And so from that data that we're gathering through the reporting framework, we can start to see where consensus is emerging, even based on corporate policy and corporate practice that may not be enforced from a legal jurisdiction.
Do you want to add anything? I think that covers already quite a lot of ground. I see other questions.
Thank you so much for the panel. This was extremely insightful. My name is Branka. I am the director of AI for Peace, and I'm also here as a Stimson Microsoft Fellow on Responsible AI. And I want to circle back to what Professor Joshua Bengio mentioned at the beginning, that we kind of missed the opportunity with social media to forecast the risks properly. And I just wanted to remind us that some of the most devastating risks that we did not forecast properly were happening in the regions, not in the global north, but in the global south regional or global majority. So things like genocide in Myanmar, or Ethiopia, or Sudan, or Philippines, like how Maria Ressa was shouting for years, right? Pay attention what's happening in Philippines, because it will be repeated and it will have an effect in other countries. So I'm just really afraid, I have to say, after this entire AI Action Summit, that we are exactly doing the same mistake with the AI now and missing a global majority in these conversations. So this is my question for you, and I think none of the AI safety institutes is also coming from global south countries. So this is a question for you of how you in your work are making a sort of a plug-in of other voices, of more inclusion and diversity. It's a very much connected question with the civil society inclusion, but maybe now thinking about the other countries that may suffer in a very, very different way in this AI potential risks. Thank you.
It's a really good question, and it's an important one. I think the AI Safety Institute Network required technical competency to be able to do the testing work. But that's not to say that the Global South voice and the concerns are not important. I think there are other avenues for that. Putting on my domestic hat, we are a big part of the Forum of Small States. It's a UN body for countries below 10 million in population, and a large part of the members there are from the Global South. And Singapore worked with Rwanda to put out an AI playbook for small states to have that conversation about what AI means for countries that are on that development journey. So I think there are other channels and mechanisms to have those conversations, and it is super important in the AI context. So I actually agree with you completely.
It's interesting because this has been a focus of the summit. So, oh my gosh. No, that can't be. I think I may have, okay. That has been a focus of the summit, is to be much more global, so much more global than Bletchley Park. And I'll talk to you later about that. I'm really sorry. You're watching in real time.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Yes, and just one last thing. The Public Interest Foundation, which was set up, was intentionally set up to try to look back at what was not done for social media and what needs to be. So it's really interesting that you brought that up.
Yeah. You see how few words you can get your message out in. I just want to say a couple things. One is completely agree, and the OECD is one of the first organizations to be criticized a bit as being a little too globally north focused. But in the AI space, for at least since we launched the observatory in 2020, which was the last thing we did before everything shut down for COVID, for those of you who happen to have been there, we work with 70 jurisdictions around the world. And if you go to the database of national AI policies on OECD.ai, you'll see all those countries. So these are the countries that we're actively working with on what their policy constructs are domestically. And they're working with us to have their work showcased on OECD.ai. So that's one piece, and that's really just sort of the way that OECD works with non-member countries, which in the AI space I think is really a poster child for how we should be working more broadly. The second piece I'll just mention, and it came up in the summit a lot, and I was fortunate enough to be over at the Quai d'Orsay on Sunday night with President Macron and Prime Minister Trudeau and others, where we discussed the Global Partnership on AI, which was an initiative that came out of a French-Canadian G7, well, Canadian and then French G7, and then sort of lived at the OECD for a little while. And what we did last year is we brought that inside the OECD, and it has a different structure and membership, and it in the sense that I won't get into the boring details of how we did it, and another set of negotiations that were extremely interesting and instructive, I would say. But ultimately, that is a platform for, and its entire purpose is to be to bridge between the 38 that we have at the OECD and a much broader community. So India was a founder of it back in 2018, 2019, and now bringing it together with the OECD. It's open for membership with lots of countries. So Sunday night we heard from, and you can read the press release, from many countries that are interested in joining, because I think they need a place at the table that is not only talk. And I think because there's tables where you can talk, but we need something in between where it's not just a political dialogue, but it's a substantive dialogue. So, we launched a paper on Sunday on copyright and IP, all about data scraping, and classically controversial topic, but one in which, if you have a broader set of countries sitting around the table. So we agreed to the integration back in July of last year, so it's still a process, but we know many countries are interested in joining, and I think precisely because they see that we've been able at the OECD to produce really concrete, specific outputs and outcomes. So I'm happy to talk more about that offline if you have recommendations of how we can do more outreach and what countries might be. And then we've made it. very cost efficient for developing countries as well, because often participating in some of these big dialogues and big international, it's just prohibitively expensive, both from a travel perspective, but also just having the resources and people on the ground. So there are many objectives that came into play into why we structured what is now called GPay or PMIA in French, in case sometimes they put the PMIA and not the GPay, so people get confused. What is it behind that? So that we could have a semi-technical place for those countries to come work with us.
Thank you very much. I think there was, another question here.
Thank you very much. I'm Julian Milakala. I work on strategic foresight at the Stimson Center. And my question is of political nature. 80 years ago, there was the beginning of the arms race on nuclear capabilities. And while scientists at the time argued heavily for sharing, politicians disagreed. And 20 years later, you had the Cuban Missile Crisis, which basically was the first event that put in guardrails. So now my question is, if it didn't work in government-controlled domains, and now speaking of the AI development almost exclusively in the public, in the private sector, where competition is of the very essence, what do you think could be done in order to avoid a Cuban Missile Crisis 2.0? And if not, what would a Cuban Missile Crisis 2.0 look like that would enable true international collaboration, not just one part of the world doing it without the other? Thank you.
It's an excellent question that I think requires a drink to accompany an answer. Julian, what I would say is that, of course, there are many different versions of the future that could lie ahead here. But, I like to be sort of very grounded in my beliefs about what's going to happen in the future. And I do genuinely think that even in perhaps this moment of, some degree of geopolitical turmoil, we should understand that, we already have established international norms, right? There is a UN-led consensus declaration at the General Assembly that has been established. There are many other instruments that are in place. It is true that those instruments are sort of at such a high level that they don't have sort of easy attempts right now to consistently implement them across the industry. But what I do see is that although there are absolutely differences in opinions about when and how exactly, on the ground, when I sort of look across, the leading AI labs that we work with all the time, I see like a real sort of commercial motivation to try and do the right thing here, because there are some counterbalances that in this industry whereby good governance is actually kind of good business, because we can't sell these products to our enterprise customers. People are not going to deploy them without trust. So absolutely you cannot rule out the possibility of, some kind of significant incident. But I do feel like, given all things considered, I do think we have put in place some good elements of a governance structure, and I believe there is the right motivation in key quarters of this discussion to try and stay ahead of that. And quite honestly, some of that is born out of a recognition that we've had recent waves of technology transformation that we all can hold in our minds, where we understand that we did not do enough and we paid the consequences. And sometimes that proximity, i.e. with the social media wave of technology, can help drive forward the right action. So not something that we can rule out, but I do feel the sort of determination and I think sort of concrete steps within the ecosystem to try and put in place some of those governance measures, and and then it's up to us, right? I mean, at the end of the day, this future doesn't get sort of imposed on us. It is about what we choose to do to make it so. So I think we should sort of also be guided by our own responsibility to not let that happen.
I think it's time for that drink. Thank you to all for your presence.
Thank you, Annabelle. And if I may add, I really wish we have all women panels like this more often.
The same. Yep.
A big round of applause for our panelists. And maybe two keynotes, key takeaways to conclude before cocktail. I would like to invite our Vice President, Agnes van der Waal, to conclude this session and maybe tell us what's your takeaway from all this.
Thank you very much. And I promise I'll be quick, because I understand that you're a very polite audience, but you want to have this drink and gathering all together. I think it was just fantastic to close this summit with such a fantastic line of speakers, and I'm very, very honored to be with you this evening. I would like to come back on those key takeaways. One, which is very important for me, is the actionable way of doing things. We were saying we are talking about a lot of policies, but concretely, when you're a company from a startup or a large group, how can you implement those policies? And I think that's really one of the key takeaways, because you give a lot of tips around that. And having to conclude, I would like to introduce you a little bit Impact AI, which is a think and do tank that has been created in a few years ago in 2018 at the time where President Macron launched his big, AI plan in France. And at that time, we were very far away from ChatGPT and generative AI. We were of course, in the key topics on AI, but responsible AI was really a new thing coming up. And a bunch of passionate members decided, in fact, to create this think tank to start thinking about what should be the governance, what we should implement to really have an ethical approach. And it was not only a conglomerate of big groups. It starts with startups, governmental representative, education members, but also, of course, big corporate groups, but also system integrators, whatever, who wants to be, in fact, really involved in implementing those ethical and responsible AI. And it's now a group of 80 companies, 80 members, more than 150 people who are regrouping every month around those topics. There are people who are doing AI, thinking AI, big PhD, etc. But there's also people like me who are using AI every day in their business and who would like to understand better how they can do that in an ethical way. And I think just to close what you're saying today, I would like first to thank those members of Impact AI, because they are doing a fantastic job every day. We are releasing a lot of content, helping companies every day to put this governance in place. And they have a lot of questions, and they have a lot, of course, since those last 2 years, since generative AI appears, it's become really critical in everything they are doing today. So I would like to encourage first you to go on the Impact AI website to see all the briefs that we have released today around topics such as managing biases, compliance of AI system, generative AI and transparency, and so on. And then, if you live in France and you're interested to join Impact AI, we are always very happy to have new members and people who want to get involved in those fantastic topics. I will close on that one. Thanks again for everything you've done and shared tonight. It was very, very insightful. And okay, so now let's go for a drink, I think. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Oh, thanks so much.